Thinking in English is a skill that transforms how you engage with the language. It moves you from translating words in your head to processing ideas directly in English, which is essential for fluency. But how do you make this shift? Let's break it down step by step. Start by building a habit of naming objects around you in English. Whenever you're in a room, glance at items nearby, a chair, a lamp, a window, and silently say their English names. Don't just stop at single words. Push yourself to form simple sentences. The chair is brown, the lamp is bright, or the window is open. This practice wires your brain to associate objects and actions directly with English, bypassing your native language. At first, this might feel slow or forced, but consistency is key. Dedicate 5 minutes daily to this exercise, perhaps during routine moments like brewing coffee or waiting for a meeting to start. Next, internalize your daily routines through English narration. As you go about your day, brushing your teeth, walking to work, cooking dinner, describe these actions in your mind. For example, I'm pouring water into the kettle. Now I'm turning on the stove. The water is boiling. This builds your ability to articulate sequences and habitual actions. Gradually, expand beyond the present moment. Reflect on earlier events. This morning, I forgot my umbrella, or plan ahead. Later, I'll call my friend. By narrating past, present, and future, you'll train your brain to handle different tenses fluidly. Visualization is another powerful tool. When learning new vocabulary, don't just memorize definitions, create mental images. If you learn the word forest, picture tall trees, rustling leaves, and the scent of pine. Imagine walking through that forest, describing it in English. The sunlight filters through the branches. Birds are chirping nearby. This technique embeds words in context, making them easier to recall. For abstract concepts like freedom or stress, associate them with personal experiences. Ask yourself, when did I last feel truly free? What was happening? Linking emotions and memories to English vocabulary deepens your connection to the language. To think in English, you must also think with English. Imagine hypothetical conversations. If you're preparing for a job interview, rehearse questions and answers mentally. They might ask about my strengths. I'll say I'm organized and adaptable. Role-play scenarios like ordering food or resolving a conflict. Anticipate possible dialogues. What if the waiter misunderstands my order? I'll politely clarify. This builds spontaneity and reduces hesitation in real interactions. Surround yourself with English input. Listen to podcasts while commuting. Watch films without subtitles. And read articles on topics you enjoy. Pay attention to how native speakers structure sentences or use idioms. For instance, notice how someone might say, "I'm swamped at work," instead of, "I'm very busy." Absorb these patterns, then mimic them in your thoughts. Keep a journal in English, even if it's just a few sentences daily. Write about your day, your goals, or your opinions. Over time, this external practice will seep into your internal monologue. A common hurdle is the urge to translate. When you catch yourself thinking, "How do I say native word in English?" Pause. Instead of searching for a direct translation, describe the idea. For example, if you don't know the word bookshelf, think, "It's a wooden shelf where I put my books." This technique, called circumlocution, keeps your mind operating in English and enhances problem-solving skills. Embrace imperfection. Your goal isn't to think flawlessly, but to think fluidly. Patience is critical. Your progress might feel invisible at first, but small wins add up. Celebrate moments when you realize you've just thought of a complex idea entirely in English. Maybe you debated with yourself about a decision, or recalled a memory without translating. These milestones signal your brain's adaptation. To maintain momentum, set micro goals. For 1 week, focus on thinking in English during a specific activity, like your morning shower or evening walk. Once that feels natural, expand to another part of your day. Pair this with English-only challenges. Spend 10 minutes visualizing your dream vacation in English, or mentally list everything you're grateful for using only English words. Now I am going to tell you a story about a guy learning how to think in English. There was once a man named Adam. Adam had been learning English for many years, but every time he tried to speak, something stopped him. He would hear a question, and instead of answering right away, he would pause, think in his native language, translate in his head, then try to say the sentence in English. But by the time he found the right words, the conversation had already moved on. This frustrated him. He had studied English grammar, memorized vocabulary, and even watched English movies. But he still felt slow when speaking. One day, he told his teacher, "I know English, but I can't speak fast. My brain doesn't work in English. I always think in my own language first." His teacher smiled and said, "That's because you haven't trained your brain to think in English yet. Learning words and rules is not enough. You need to start thinking in English, not just translating." Adam was curious. "But how can I do that?" he asked. "I don't even realize when I start thinking in my own language." The teacher explained, "It's a habit. Right now, your brain is used to your native language. It's like a road you walk on every day. Your brain automatically goes in that direction. But if you start building a new road, it will become easier to take that path. You have to practice thinking in English, just like you practice speaking or listening." That night, Adam lay in bed, thinking about what his teacher had said. He realized that he needed to change the way he used English. The next morning, he decided to try something new. Instead of thinking in his native language when he woke up, he forced himself to think in English. He looked at the ceiling and said in his head, "I am in bed. The ceiling is white. I need to wake up." It felt strange at first, but he kept going. When he walked to the kitchen, he continued the exercise. "I will make coffee. The water is hot. I need a spoon." He spoke to himself in his head, describing everything he saw. At first, it was slow. He had to search for words, and sometimes he didn't know how to say something. But instead of switching to his native language, he tried to describe things in English. When he didn't know the word for sink, he said, "The place where I wash the dishes." As the days passed, Adam noticed something. The more he forced himself to think in English, the easier it became. He didn't have to translate as much. Simple thoughts came to him naturally in English. One day, while walking outside, he saw a cat and immediately thought, "That cat looks hungry." He didn't translate. The sentence just appeared in his mind. Excited by his progress, Adam decided to challenge himself. He set a timer for 5 minutes and told himself, "For these 5 minutes I will only think in English." The first time, it was difficult. His mind kept going back to his native language. But he didn't give up. Every day he added more time. 10 minutes, 15 minutes, then 30 minutes. One afternoon, Adam was sitting in a cafe when he overheard a conversation in English. Normally, he would listen and then translate the words in his head. But this time, something was different. He understood what they were saying without translating. It felt natural. He realized that his brain was starting to process English like a native speaker. He was excited but wanted to improve even more. He remembered something his teacher had told him. If you want to train your brain, use English in different ways. So Adam started reading books in English without translating every word. If he didn't understand something, he guessed the meaning from the sentence. At first, it was difficult, but soon he noticed that he was reading faster. He also tried another exercise, shadowing. He would play an English video and repeat what the speaker said as quickly as possible. It helped him get used to the rhythm of English. One day, he discovered language exchange apps. He met people from different countries who wanted to practice English too. They chatted every day, and Adam realized that he was thinking in English more often, even when he wasn't speaking. Months passed, and Adam's confidence grew. One day, he was in a store when a tourist asked him for directions in English. Without hesitation, he answered. He didn't think about grammar. He didn't translate. He just spoke. That night, Adam thought about his journey. He remembered how difficult it had been at the start, but he had trained his brain, step by step, to think in English. Now, English felt natural. It was no longer a foreign language. It was a part of him. As he turned off the light and closed his eyes, one last thought came to his mind, effortlessly, without translation. I am proud of myself. Here is another long, immersive, and engaging story about James learning how to think in English. James had always dreamed of speaking English fluently. He had been studying it for years, memorizing vocabulary, practicing grammar, and even watching English movies. But despite all his efforts, something felt wrong. Every time he tried to speak, he would pause, translate his thoughts from his native language into English, and then struggle to form a sentence. One day, he was at a cafe when a tourist approached him and asked for directions in English. James wanted to help, but his mind froze. He understood the question, but his brain started searching for words in his native language first. By the time he translated them into English, the tourist had already thanked him and walked away. Frustrated, James went home and stared at himself in the mirror. "Why is this so hard?" he whispered. He knew he had to do something different. He didn't just need to learn English. He needed to think in English. The next day, James walked into his English class and told his teacher, "I need to stop translating in my head. I want to think in English, but I don't know how." His teacher smiled and said, "Thinking in English is not something that happens overnight. It's like learning to ride a bike. At first, you will fall many times. But if you practice every day, one day you will realize you are doing it without even thinking." James was determined. He asked, "Where do I start?" The teacher gave him a challenge. "For the next 7 days, I want you to describe everything you see in English. When you wake up, say in your mind, 'I am in bed. My pillow is soft. The sun is shining through the window.' When you walk down the street, think, 'I see a man wearing a blue jacket. The bus is arriving. The wind is cold today.' Don't worry if you don't know every word. Just keep going." James accepted the challenge. The first day was difficult. His brain wanted to switch back to his native language. He kept stopping to translate words in his head. But he forced himself to continue. If he didn't know a word, he described it. Instead of thinking traffic light, he thought, the thing that tells cars to stop and go. By the third day, something strange happened. While brushing his teeth, he suddenly thought, I need to buy more toothpaste. He didn't translate the thought. It came to him directly in English. It was a small moment, but it gave him hope. Encouraged by his progress, James decided to push himself further. He started the 5-minute rule. Every morning, he set a timer and forced himself to think only in English for 5 minutes. No translation allowed. It was exhausting at first, but each day it became a little easier. Soon, he increased it to 10 minutes, then 20. One afternoon, while sitting in a park, he overheard 2 people speaking English. Normally, he would translate their words in his head, but this time he understood the meaning naturally. It was as if his brain had started recognizing English as its own language, instead of something foreign. Excited, James wanted to speed up his progress. He read books in English and promised himself he wouldn't translate every new word. Instead, he guessed the meaning from the sentence. At first, it was frustrating, but soon he realized that his reading speed was improving. He also tried shadowing, a technique where he played English podcasts and repeated every sentence as fast as possible. It felt awkward at first, but after a few weeks, his brain started catching the rhythm of the language. Determined to immerse himself in English even more, James changed his phone settings to English. He started watching movies without subtitles. He even talked to himself in English when he was alone. What should I eat for dinner? Maybe pasta. I don't feel like cooking tonight. Maybe I'll just make a sandwich. One day, James decided to test himself. He joined a language exchange app and started chatting with native English speakers. At first, he was nervous. But then, something surprising happened. He wasn't translating anymore. He was responding naturally. It wasn't perfect, but it felt real. Months passed, and James no longer had to force himself to think in English. It became automatic. One evening, he was writing in his journal when he realized something incredible. He had written an entire page in English without even noticing. The next morning, he was walking to work when a tourist stopped him and asked for directions. This time, he smiled and answered smoothly, without hesitation. No translation, no stress, just natural English. As the tourist thanked him and walked away, James felt something deep inside. It wasn't just confidence. It was proof that he had changed. English was no longer a subject he studied. It was a part of the way he thought. That night, before falling asleep, James had one final thought. And for the first time in his life, it came to him in perfect English. I did it. Last, but not least, another story that will inspire you. It is about Liam. Liam had always admired people who could speak English fluently. Whenever he watched interviews or listened to podcasts, he wondered, how do they speak so effortlessly? How do the words just flow? He had studied English for years, taken courses, and even tried speaking with friends. But every time he had a conversation, he felt like his brain was slowing him down. He had to translate everything before he could speak. By the time he was ready to answer, the conversation had already moved on. One day, at his job, his boss introduced him to a client from the United States. The client greeted him with a warm smile and said, "Hey there, nice to meet you." Liam panicked. His mind raced to find the right response. He quickly translated the sentence in his head, thought of a reply, and then translated it back to English before speaking. Yes. I am happy to meet you too." The client nodded politely and continued talking, but Liam barely understood anything. His brain was so focused on translating that he wasn't really listening. After the conversation, he felt embarrassed. Why is this still happening to me? I know English, but I can't use it fast enough. That evening, Liam searched online for solutions. He read about how some people train themselves to think in English instead of translating. The idea fascinated him. He decided to try it. The next morning, as soon as he woke up, he forced himself to describe his surroundings in English. The sun is coming through the window. My alarm is ringing. I feel sleepy. It was difficult. His brain kept switching back to his native language, but he refused to give up. Throughout the day, he continued the exercise. When he made coffee, he thought, "I need more sugar." When he put on his shoes, he thought, "These are a little tight today." Even simple thoughts became part of his training. At work, he tried to avoid translating when reading emails. Instead of thinking, "What does this sentence mean in my language?" he asked himself, "What is the message in English?" After a week, he noticed something interesting. His mind was beginning to accept English as a way of thinking. When he saw a red car on the street, he didn't think of the word in his native language first. He immediately thought, "That's a red car." It was a small victory, but it gave him confidence. Determined to improve, Liam started reading books in English without a dictionary. If he didn't know a word, he guessed the meaning from the sentence. He also practiced shadowing, listening to English speakers and repeating their sentences immediately. This helped him develop the natural rhythm of the language. A month later, something unexpected happened. He was grocery shopping when he bumped into a tourist who asked him for directions. "Excuse me, do you know where I can find a pharmacy?" Without thinking, Liam responded naturally, "Yes, go straight and turn left at the next corner. You'll see it on your right." As the tourist thanked him and walked away, Liam stood there, stunned. He hadn't translated. He hadn't paused to think. The words had just come out. That night, he realized something. He had trained his brain to stop depending on his native language. English was no longer a school subject. It was a part of his daily thinking. All of these stories and lessons share one powerful truth. Mastering English is not just about memorizing words or studying grammar. It's about changing the way you think. Whether it's James training his brain by describing his daily routine in English, Liam breaking free from translation by immersing himself in the language, or the many learners who have struggled with speaking confidence. The key to success is consistent, active practice. Thinking in English is not an instant transformation, but a skill that develops with time and effort. The more you expose yourself to English, the more naturally it will become part of your thoughts. Stop translating and start experiencing the language as it is, through immersion, shadowing, reading, and real conversations. Mistakes are part of the journey, not something to fear. Every time you push yourself to think in English, you are training your brain to make it automatic. And one day, just like James and Liam and Adam, you'll realize that English is no longer just a language you study. It's a language you live. If you enjoyed this story and found it helpful, don't forget to subscribe. On my channel, we make learning English fun, natural, and easy to fit into your daily life. With engaging stories, practical tips, and expert advice, you'll improve your English effortlessly. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new lesson. Keep learning, keep practicing, and remember, every step you take brings you closer to fluency. See you in the next video.